we get rolling with this week's video, a couple quick announcements to make. Last week, I was the guest on two separate podcasts. The first is called Shooting Wide Open, and that's done by Noah Smith. Noah's a really cool guy. He shoots film, he's a musician, he's a graphic designer. And basically the premise of it is just kind of sitting there talking with another photographer and talking about the process and the challenges and everything sort of associated with it. So I had the honor of being his first guest, and he's got some other really cool guests lined up. So I look forward to listening to more episodes from him. You can find it on iTunes and other places as well, but it's called Shooting Wide Open. I was also a guest on the Landscape Photography podcast. That's done by Nick Page, and it was definitely fun to sit there and talk photography with him. He is a digital shooter, I'm a film shooter. We're talking about sort of the differences, some of the limitations, and some of the stuff that goes hand in hand with it. So I think that's also a good listen. And also another announcement to make, I have a Amazon store now where basically all the little bits of outdoor equipment, camping gear, all the stuff you see me use in the field, I have a dedicated Amazon page where it has all my favorite things listed there. Also my video kit, which I'll talk about today, tripods, some other stuff along those lines. So whether it's a headlamp, whether it's a camp stove, whether it's a bivy sack, or whether it's a Sony video camera, I have everything listed there. So you can follow the link down below in the show notes, it'll take you there. And obviously if you click on anything, if you buy anything, I do get a cut of that. So I definitely do appreciate the support. But also if you're just curious about what I'm using out in the field, everything is listed down there. And I keep adding stuff to it all the time. But this week's episode is also kind of gear related. I talk about why I switched from Nikon to Sony, talk about the lenses I'm using and sort of stuff I've learned so far. I hope you guys enjoy. What is going on, everyone? So in this week's video, I want to talk a little bit about some of the behind the scenes stuff as far as the video equipment that I'm using, because I used a brand new setup for me on this trip. It was a used camera, but it's new to me. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about sort of what I've used in the past. So for the past like 3 years or so, I've used a Nikon D750, and I really like that camera. Something about the ergonomics, just had a nice feel to it. It was pretty small for what it was, for being a full frame SLR camera. I had the flip screen, and I could shoot video at about ISO 12,800 and still be pretty decent. I pushed it up to 25,600 and even higher a few times. So it got really kind of grainy in the shadows. And on the lens I was using the vast majority of the time was the Nikon 20mm f1.8. I really like that lens, pretty compact lens, lets a lot of light in. And it seems like that'd almost be too wide angle for some of the stuff I do, but it's actually just like the perfect focal length. So I really like that setup, which is why I use it for so many years. But I did have an opportunity a few months back to basically sell my D750 and then buy a Sony a7S II for about the same price. So I got a really, really good deal on it. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with the Sony a7S II, which, I mean, this camera's been around for a couple years or so, so it's not exactly like a brand new camera. But this is a mirrorless camera, so it's smaller and lighter than the Nikon I was working with before. That was one of the things that's kind of nice about it, though there are some sort of compromises that come with that. But this is a full frame sensor, just like my Nikon D750 was, but instead of being a 24 megapixel sensor, this is a 12 megapixel sensor. And as a result, you have bigger pixels over the same surface area. You have much better low light ability. So if any of you guys have seen the first 2 videos I've posted so far from the Death Valley trip, you've already seen some scenes I filmed at ISO 100,000 and above, which is one of the things I really, really love about this camera, because it gives me the ability to film in these really low light situations where your eye can see things, but all the video cameras I've used in the past can't see them. I mean, this can see stars in the sky. It can see satellite flares in the night sky. It can see some really cool stuff. There are some drawbacks to it. Since you have such a big sensor and such a small camera, there's not a lot of room for the batteries. So the batteries are tiny, and as a result, the battery life is not very good. But that's a known issue with the camera. And I have 5 batteries for it, and on my recent trip, I was able to do just fine with that. I have a dual battery charger that plugs in via USB. I was able to charge up 2 batteries at a time, and that worked out really well. But I was really, really happy with the high ISO ability of this camera. It finally was able to capture pretty well the feeling of what I saw when I was out there. So I'm pretty excited about that. One of the other things I was pretty excited to upgrade to was the ability to shoot in 4K. I figured that at some point when Nikon updates the D750, they would end up putting 4K in its replacement. But I don't think they would ever go to something like this, which is a 12 megapixel full frame. So I figured Nikon, whatever they upgraded to, wasn't going to be as good as what this camera currently does. So that's one of the reasons why I jumped to the Sony. But when it comes to the 4K, I was a little concerned about how my older computer would handle the 4K footage. On my recent trip, I filmed 200 gigabytes worth of data. That isn't the big deal. I mean, the big deal is my computer is from 2010, and it is an older Mac Pro, the kind of cheese grater looking tower. And turns out it can actually handle the 4K video just fine. It takes a little bit longer, but it can handle it okay. But the 4K was one of the things I was really looking forward to upgrading with this. And if you guys haven't already, if you have an opportunity to watch my first 2 Death Valley videos on a 4K TV, do it. It's a really cool experience. I think it really gives a good feeling for actually being there. You see all these fine little details. I've had a Sony 4K TV for a few years now, and the first time I've actually seen 4K content on it was watching one of my Death Valley videos on there via the YouTube app. So it's kind of a cool experience, but even if you don't have a 4K TV, even if you don't have a 4K monitor, if you watch the videos in 4K, even on a high definition monitor, it's a sharper detail, which is pretty cool. So the ability to shoot 4K was pretty good. One of the other things I was really looking forward to getting as well was the in-body stabilizer. It's not a really strong stabilizer, it's very minor, but with just this small kind of handshake stuff, it really kind of smooths that out a little bit. So I think some of you might notice that the videos are a little bit smoother now as a result, which is pretty nice. When it comes to lenses, I initially bought an adapter so I can put my Nikon lenses on the Sony just to kind of see how I liked it. All manual adapter. And I pretty quickly went out and bought a replacement for my wide angle lens just because I wanted to keep things simple, and the adapter just added another level of complexity. And also you end up having, a pretty small camera, but then you got this adapter and you got a bigger lens. It ends up being kind of a bigger setup again. And when I was trying to figure out exactly what lens I wanted to get for the setup, I limited it just to manual focus lenses because honestly, to me, that just makes life a little bit easier. Pretty much all the video you've seen me guys film over the past few years, it's all been manual focus. I might have the camera autofocus a shot, initially, but then I lock it into manual so it doesn't change. Because I just haven't had a good experience with autofocus. It just kind of drifts around. It doesn't do exactly what I want it to do. So I'm doing manual focus anyways. And there's a Rokinon 20mm 1.8, which I was looking at, very similar specs to the Nikon I had. It's a native lens to the Sony, but one of my whole purposes for going to Sony is keeping things smaller. So I ended up going with the Zeiss, the Loxia 21mm f2.8. Because it is a 2.8 lens instead of a 1.8, the lens can be smaller, which is kind of nice. And even though I give up about a stop and a third as far as light gathering ability, the crazy high ISOs on this camera far more than makes up for that. But this is the setup that I used on my recent trip for pretty much any video that you saw on that trip. It was all my A7S II, and it was all filmed with the 21mm f2.8. And you guys might be thinking, a manual focus lens, that seems like that would make it a little bit more difficult. But in reality, it actually made things a little easier. With the Nikon setup, what I did in the past is I'd have the camera mounted on the tripod, I'd have it face focus on me, then I'd lock it into manual focus, I'd do a record, like a little test video, and then stop it, look at the video, see if it's in focus, and then record the real one. With this setup, all I did is I just did a little experimenting. I just figured out how I preset the focus on here in order to have it at just the right distance. And I just figured out which numbers to kind of line up on the focus scale and the depth of field scale there. And once I did that, it's super easy. And actually I just focused it just right there, put it on a tripod, hit record, and I'm up and running. So I was really, really happy with the way that that worked out. And as far as, filming stuff in really, really low light, for the purposes of video, this lens kind of has an infinity hard stop. So if I focus all the way to the end there, that's gonna be sufficiently in focus for doing video. Technically for stills, we have more resolution, it's more discerning. You wanna pull it back just a little bit. But it makes it really fast to set up the camera because it is manual focus. And there's also some other guides on here where you can have it zoom in and kind of see how you're doing for the focusing. But that's my new setup. I really, really like it. Combination of the 4K video, the in-body stabilizer, the fact that it's smaller and lighter, which is really nice, the really good low light ability. And since I was able to get this camera used at a very reasonable price, I was able to go out and buy some lenses for it. These lenses are not inexpensive lenses, but it's one of the things where if it helps get the job done, that really helps out. And then the other lens I have for it is the Zeiss, the Loxia 50mm f2. So this is kind of my B-roll sort of lens. I'll use it for these sort of videos we're doing here. I'm actually filming this on the G7X Mark II right now because that's the only other video camera that I have. That'll remain as my backpacking camera, but maybe at some point I'll replace that camera with one that could do 4K because honestly, I was holding off on 4K for a while, but it really does have a pretty cool look to it. But I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you around next week.